I'm a longtime member and education advocate with Educators for Excellence. I'm happy to be here today to share a bit about how this data resonates with me and also weighs heavily on me. Both as one of the authors of the report and as a teacher living with the reality of public education under the Trump administration, I've experienced both very real policy impacts of the Trump's leadership in confusion, fear, and the harmful rhetoric that his administration is intentionally sowing. In terms of the real policy implications, just this last month, my school lost 3 AmeriCorps staff members as a result of the budget cuts. 2 of these members served on the student services side, where they contributed to fostering safe, inclusive learning environments outside of the classroom to help students grow, while building those deep relationships with the students, mentoring them, laughing with them, and then overnight, they were gone. And another AmeriCorps member supported English courses by collaboratively developing lessons specifically to support multi-language learners because she was a Spanish speaker, and her departure was felt immediately by the teacher and the students. It's another example of students building trust with an adult only to lose them without any explanation. I also see this impact of confusion in education as a result of the administration's actions. When I interview prospective teachers for my school, most of them are always asking me, how will your school be impacted by federal funding cuts? It's hard for me to answer. I want to say everything's going to be okay. I want to be optimistic, but I actually don't know. The confusion from the administration is intentional, and it impacts the desire to enter the profession. As Evan was saying earlier, only 19% of teachers would recommend this profession to others. And I understand that. Why would you recommend others to go into a profession when the future is uncertain? The fear is very real too. I was recently telling another teacher of color about the work E4E does, and she said to me, "I'm glad you're speaking up because I'm afraid to." I'm glad you're speaking up because I'm afraid to. And this sentiment is shared amongst educators. I've heard other members of E4E's National Teacher Leader Council express this fear while advocating alongside me. It's not only teachers who are fearful, parents and students are as well. 74% of teachers favor the guaranteed right of undocumented students to attend public schools, where legally they still have the right. However, recently, undocumented students have left our school to either return to their home country or go transfer out and go to a school closer home because their parents are fearful of what might happen to them in the classroom or at a school building. I'm hearing more bullying towards and among our Hispanic students, them saying to each other, "ICE is coming to get you. You might not be here the next day." This deeply resonates with me. As an Arab American, I've experienced this kind of rhetoric in schools. After 9/11, many of us, particularly brown students, were called terrorists. We were told to go back to our own country. And the impact of that period has been long lasting to those of us who were bullied and ostracized simply for who we are. The damage is still talked about amongst my community until this day. So seeing my students face this now is a painful echo of my own past and a reminder of how urgently we must protect and support our students. Now, the Trump administration is intentionally moving quickly to cut out stakeholders like teachers from policymaking and intimidate them into complying. This administration talks a lot about getting rid of bureaucracy, like getting rid of the United States Department of Education, but sometimes things moving slowly is a good thing. Democracies are meant for people to share their perspectives before a decision's made, and leaders are able to effectively communicate decisions and the possible impacts. We don't have that right now. It makes teaching even more difficult. We need legislators and decision makers to hear our voices as we advocate the needs of our students. Educators are experts. We have pathways to lead education forward, and we need a seat at the table. Rather than overhauling the education and making drastic budget cuts, we need a bold solution guided by educators to reimagine our national public education system. Thank you. Now I'm going to pass it to a friend of mine, my bestie, a wonderful educator, Carlotta Pope.
Wow, thank you, Joe. Thank you, Bestie. Good afternoon, everyone, and happy Teacher Appreciation Week and Day to you all. My name is Carlotta Pope. I have the pleasure of teaching English and AP African American Studies in New York City, one of the best districts, public school, DOE. And I have the pleasure of also leading E4E's National Teacher Leader Council with Joe and other amazing young leaders. As Joe mentioned, I see the confusion and fear amongst my students, and I think it contributes to certain misinformation teachers say that's impacting our classrooms. It's hard when students who might be first generation Americans, when they come to me and say, well, Ms. Pope, since I'm a first generation American, am I at risk? And they struggle to identify trustworthy resources of information or whether or not how to even discern that information, what it really means. These students need to see themselves represented in our daily classes and in the daily lessons. But unfortunately, the Trump administration is going to great lengths to make that difficult. 88% of teachers support the idea of culturally relevant materials. This really stuck out to me because I am an advocate of CRE initiative and what it means to culturally have culturally relevant, sustainable material with our students. But it seems like the Trump administration continues to ramp up its attacks on these such materials and whether or not it should be taught in the classroom. Luckily, like I said, I have the pleasure of teaching in New York, where as a state, the education leaders have indicated that they will not comply with these directives that the Trump administration have given. However, not everyone has the opportunity to be like me in my English classroom and teach books like The Hate You Give, or get to put a plot twist on, we know Shakespeare, but have you known that you can do Shakespeare versus hip hop? And my students never really they still get to enjoy these types of things and be aware of the things that are going on in this book while also identifying with themselves and others. It's sad that although they get to thrive in my classroom, in states in America, across America, these books are also banned. And this tells them, or might tell them, that there's no place for their identity outside of New York, outside of this little bubble. So that's hard. Being an Afro-Caribbean Black educator in America has always been emotionally taxing. But as of late, right now, it feels even more so. I simultaneously carry the emotional burden of existing as an individual in this country, but also having to be unbiased and support my students emotionally and academically through these experiences. The invisible tax is what former Secretary John King Jr. refers to this as, or some would say it's this sort of invisible, additional, but often intangible burdens that teachers of color have to carry each day. And it seems to be elevated more and more in this present time. I think about my AP African American Studies class that they have to sit and test this Thursday. And we're talking about the Reconstruction period. And my students look at me sideways because they're like, hey, Ms. Pope, it kind of feels like that now. And how do I answer them and say, hey, we got to keep pushing, right? How do I answer them without navigating my own emotional burdens? That's something that I'm conflicted with from day to day. But it means my role as an educator is even more important. It's even more important to make sure that the information being put out there to my students are not only correct, but it's something that they can now go back and teach to their families and put in their communities. Because as a teacher, I love what I do. I think my friends would say I'm in love with this job. But being forced to stand by and watch leaders dismantle education against the advice of actual educators is becoming something that's heartbreaking. As Congresswoman Hayes introduced with her solution, we need a seat at the table. Educators need a seat at the table. And we want to advise on policies and the impact of our students' future. We are at a pivotal moment in our society. And the question isn't whether change is coming, because that's inevitable. It's who's going to help shape it. And I'm hoping we make sure that teachers do. Thank you, Evan. I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you so much, Carlotta. Thank you, Joe. You both give me so much hope in this moment that is so challenging. And now I'm really excited that I get to turn it over to somebody else that gives me a lot of hope in this moment, because there are legislators that are noticing the gap between what teachers want and need and the conversation we are having nationally. Often those legislators were ones that used to be in the classroom themselves, like Congresswoman Hayes, who is, well, first, happy Teacher Appreciation Week and Day to you, Congresswoman Hayes, because we still honor you. Once an educator, always an educator. But you introduced a resolution that is encouraging your colleagues to not only recognize this day, but do more than just recognize it, give teachers a real meaningful seat at the table. And so I am pleased to turn it over to you to let you say a little more both about the work you are doing and this moment in time. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you all for inviting me to join you. And just so that we're clear, I am a teacher. It is who I was born to be. It is what I do. It is the only profession that I've ever loved that loved me back. It is where my work felt meaningful and the outcomes were critical and important. So it is just humbling for me to be now a teacher serving as a legislator in Congress. And I'll tell you that one of the most shocking things for me throughout this entire journey, because I mean, all I ever wanted to do was teach. You know, I wanted to close my door and really stand in the gap so that my students could have the best outcomes possible. And it wasn't until I entered this national platform as National Teacher of the Year that I realized that so many of the people in the rooms making decisions for teachers really had no idea what actually happened in the classroom. You know, I caught myself saying, yeah, that's not how it works. I know that you think you're helping, but let me explain to you what that will look like by the time it gets to me in my classroom. And even here in Congress, I mean, the day before I got sworn in, I was in the classroom. I was in my school district. You know, when I ran for Congress, I said, I can't quit my job. I'm a teacher. You know, I have to run at night. I'm gonna have to make it work. But really, just there was a lack of understanding. And what I can tell you is that I have no time or no use for all of the platitudes. People tell me we support teachers, we love the work they do, my kids go to school, my mom was a teacher. Then act like you support teachers. So it is so important now for teachers to use their voices and make sure that we are a part of the conversation and people are not just legislating on our behalf. One of the things that I would always hear from my colleagues was, you know, I really don't get involved in politics. I have nothing to do with that. This for me is policy. Like I understand in a very different way that if we don't fully fund IDEA, that we will never meet the goals, especially in our Title I school districts. You know, there are so many other things that cannot happen until our students who need special education and wraparound services are taken care of. So when I saw the results of this survey come out, thank you so much, Educators for Excellence, for even doing this, but nothing in it surprised me because this is what I know. This is what teachers talk about. The idea that 84% of participants felt like students should have protection from discrimination based on their gender and sexual identity. That's not new for teachers. We understand that if a student is in your class, they are your child. You make sure that they feel safe and included in their academic environment. It is not new for teachers, as you said, Ms. Pope, to introduce culturally relevant materials into the curriculum so that it engages students and draws them in because they now see themselves as part of the lessons and the literature. That's not new. That's not anything that is different. You know, it's not new that public tax dollars should be spent on public education because once we fail to do that, the kids who are the most marginalized and vulnerable are left behind. The idea that the students who have the most support at home and the most involved and active parents should be the ones who should have the access to those opportunities. When I was a teacher in the classroom, that just compelled me to say, I have to do more for this child because they don't have the support at home. You know, if everything they were learning about school happened at school, then that meant I had to do more. I had to try harder. I had to engage. I had to close the gap. I had to get the resources for them that they were not getting at home. Not, well, if your parents aren't going to do it or if your family can't do it, then I guess you're left behind. That's not how teachers think. That's not what teachers do. And that's why, again, I'm so happy that you even commissioned this survey. The results do not surprise me. But as a legislator, now as I marry the two professions, the teacher in me already knew this data. Nothing about it was surprising. Everything about it was reaffirming and just consistent with my values, with my belief, with the profession that I love. What is different now is that as a legislator, I understand how powerful data is. Data transforms information into knowledge. Data is what drives congressional budgets. Data is how we either appropriate funds or rescind funds from a program. Data is how we test to see if something is working. Data is how we measure student achievement. And literally, as Ms. Pope said, her students are about to sit for a test. And what is done with that information on the ground is very different than what is done with that information at the federal level. And it matters and it means something. So there has to be an intercessory to say that, no, I need you to not just look at that number, but I need you to consider all of the variables that went into that. I need you to consider, if my community just had a natural disaster, or we were just hit with a hurricane, or this group of students just lost a classmate. Those are all of the things that are navigated at the local level or in the school building that Congress never even has to think about. So it is impossible. It is impossible to make informed decisions without the translators of this information. And that would be the teachers in the classroom. And that for me has been a constant struggle because you can't have it both ways. I refuse to accept that we support teachers, we honor their work, we want to invite people into the pipeline, but you're also simultaneously deconstructing all of the supports that welcome young people into the pipeline. I knew one of the hardest questions for me to answer when I was the National Teacher of the Year, everywhere I went, people would say, well, when did you know you wanted to become a teacher? And that seemed like such a foreign question to me. I was born that way. I always knew it was who I am. It is a part of my DNA. It brings me so much joy. It was never a transactional relationship. So I just think about as a fourth grader, as a sixth grader, as a high school student, as a community college student, all of the barriers that were in place to get to being a certified teacher. If we really wanted to support the profession, let's start to eliminate some of those barriers. Let's make sure that we have the most highly qualified individuals in front of our student, no matter what community they're in. I always think back to the number of job offers that I got after I became the National Teacher of the Year to teach in all these other districts. And I says, I choose to be in my Title I district. I'm here on purpose. I love these kids. This is a part of my passion. And, I want them to know that it's not how you start, it's how you finish. And I want to be a part of that. So making sure that we have kids who come out of those schools and out of those communities who then go back, and contribute to those communities, making sure that we literally provide a pathway to kids who have spent the majority of their life on the receiving end of aid and say, you have the capacity to be the giver. And I think it is so incredibly frustrating for me, this idea that if you come from a family that can't afford higher education, then that should not be in the cards for you. Maybe, there are all these different pathways. Maybe they want to be an engineer. Maybe they want to be a doctor or a dentist. And it is up to us, to you, to teachers to support that and for federal legislation to provide the infrastructure to make that happen, whether it be through public service loan forgiveness. I think about all of the people, in the last couple of years talking about loan forgiveness. That has always been a part of the conversation for Title I school teachers. There was always this contract where if you choose to go to a high needs district in a high demand field, that this would be the trade-off because you are foregoing a salary that you can actually live off of. So nothing in this survey was new to me, but it was reaffirming for me. But also, just understanding in the world that I operate in today as a legislator, the power of data, it is undeniable because there are a whole lot of things that you can narratively distort, but you cannot distort the fact that teachers who are in the classroom actually dealing with these issues on a day-to-day basis, actually dealing with students, are weighing in, and the results are resounding. Resounding. These are the issues they care about. They are the ones that have the most knowledge, and legislators should be not only listening to the data, but relying on the teachers in the classroom, reaching back, asking questions, asking for clarifying information, asking how can we best support, and then following up and creating lasting relationships. So again, I mean, we are in tumultuous times, if you will, but I haven't given up hope on the fact that government works. I understand what it takes to make government work. I would always say, you know, when I'm speaking, when I entered the world of politics, that I know what happens when government works because I am what happens when government works. And many of my students, many of your students, many of the people that we deal with on a daily basis are at a point where this has to work. You know, they needed it to work 20 years ago. So today is already too late, and tomorrow is a lifetime away. So there is no other choice than the community school in their neighborhood. There is no other choice than the study group for SAT prep and, you know, career and technical education. There is no other choice. So the one that is before them has to be the best possible option. And I think we all have a responsibility to make that happen. And I spend a lot of time trying to explain this to people who are, I used to think well-intentioned, but today I can tell you affirmatively that these are policy choices because we have the ability to support children. We have the ability to pass legislation to fully fund IDEA and special education. We have the ability to make sure that students are protected from discrimination and that all school buildings have clean air and water. We have the ability to do those things. These are policy choices. So, you know, we need more people who understand the policy to be in the positions to pull those levers, to hold leaders accountable, to fill in the gaps and follow up where we need them to. And having the data to support that literally just helps to make this work a little bit easier because there is a reference point to say, it is not just me who feels this way. It is me and thousands of my closest friends. It is me and a community of educators. It is me and the parents who support and the wraparound services that are provided. So it is not just me. So again, just thank you for all of your work and for everything you do to hold down your corner of the vineyard. And I pray for the profession every day. I pray for our kids and the people who are still on the ground. And I think the last thing I'll say is everybody talks about what teachers do on behalf of students and celebrating the profession based on student outcomes. Teaching is not mission work. So when I came to Congress, people say, you know, you talk about the teachers too much. You need to focus more on the students. I talk about the teachers because I understand that the best thing we can do for students is to put the best educators in front of them. The best way to support students is to support their teachers. The best way to make sure that our students' mental health is taken care of is to make sure that they have whole and complete people spending time with them and their mental health is taken care of. So those two things are not mutually exclusive. And I need for the educators who are on this call and involved in this work to know that it is not a trade-off. And for as much as we fight for our children, we have to do a better job of fighting for ourselves.
Well, thank you, Congresswoman Hayes, for that call to action for teachers across the country to stand up and say what they need. That's the goal of this survey and of this organization. So we are grateful for your leadership, for your advocacy on behalf of educators, and for your clear and ongoing commitment to making our public education system a pathway to opportunity for every child in America. So thank you for your leadership. It is great to see somebody taking their voice from their classroom to Congress in the way that you have. Now I am.
I'll just say that kids were so much easier.
I believe it. I believe it. We can see that from the outside. So, I mean, I've been in both Joe and Carlotta's classroom, and they are way better behaved than the halls you're walking through. That's for sure. I am also truly honored to turn the mic over to one of the fiercest advocates I know, who is working across the country to ensure that parents everywhere have the community, the tools, the supports, and most importantly, the backup to feel confident that they can fight for their children and their schools. So Carrie Rodriguez, who's the president of the National Parents Union, is going to share a little bit about the perspective of this data from parents.
And what a blessing to hear Congresswoman Hayes today. I needed that. I needed my cup to be filled. So what a blessing for me to be with all of you. But I just want to say, like, American families are standing shoulder to shoulder with the educators of this nation, not just in gratitude for their commitment during Teacher Appreciation Week, but really in solidarity with what is a very clear rejection of the policies that are threatening to dismantle public education as we know it. You know, I'm Matthew, Miles, and David's mom. I'm the wife of a teacher, and I'm also the president of the National Parents Union. And I'm not surprised, but I am deeply moved by what we see in the Voices from the Classroom 2025 report. Families across this country have been sounding the alarm for years about how our public schools are under attack. And this survey makes it clear that our teachers, regardless of their political affiliation, are just as alarmed. We're all standing shoulder to shoulder with educators in rejecting the Trump administration's education agenda and all of their efforts to dismantle our public schools. Because families want strong, inclusive, well-resourced schools, not culture war distractions, not book bans, or threats to vital funding like Title I and IDEA. When the system fails to protect every single child, especially our most vulnerable, it fails all of us. So teachers are speaking very clearly to us today. They're not interested in partisan agendas. They're focused on solutions that actually help our kids, like high quality instructional materials, smarter staffing models, tools to tackle chronic absenteeism, you know, the real stuff. And we're right there with you. Families want to work alongside teachers to reimagine public education in ways that truly serve every single student. And that is the work we should be doing together. But from coast to coast, families want our children to be able to learn accurate history, to be protected from discrimination, and to grow up in schools that are safe, inclusive, and prepare them for the world that they're going to inherit. We want our kids to be critical thinkers and responsible citizens and resilient problem solvers. And that requires investment, not abandonment, collaboration, not chaos. We're here to reject any attempt by any political figure or any party to slash funding from Title I or IDEA, or to try to close the Department of Education, or to silence truth in our classrooms, or slash $1 billion in federal funding for mental health support from our nation's schools. That's not just an attack on teachers, it's an attack on our children. Families are also seeing the deep daily impact of chronic absenteeism and the mental health crisis among students. We know it's not about getting back to normal. It's about reimagining a system that never worked equitably in the first place. And yes, I said the word equity. I'm not going to let people make that into a bad word. And just like our teachers, families are open to bold innovation, from AI to strategic staffing, new innovative ideas, if that means better outcomes for our kids. So for all of our educator friends, we say this: we see you, we hear you, we are with you, and we love you. And we deeply appreciate you, not just this week, but every day. And to Donald Trump and the Republican leadership, please stop playing politics with our kids' futures. Listen to teachers, listen to families, and let's get serious about policies that lift up our public schools, because our children cannot afford anything less.
Thank you so much, Carrie. Talk about filling up our cups, to have both you and Congresswoman Hayes sharing how important it is to listen to educators, and not that it's just about listening, it's about actually creating the schools that will both serve the adults and the kids that are in them in a way that is meaningful and matters. Gives me a ton of hope today. I'm going to open it up to see if there are any questions from the reporters that are with us. I'll give you a minute. You can drop them into the chat or come off mute and share them. And if not, while we're waiting to see if anybody comes off mute, I'll just throw out one question, because we talked a lot about the challenges, and Joe and Carlotta, we got to hear a lot about the challenges in your building that are being driven by the narrative and the cuts and the changes that are coming from our federal government. I'm curious what in this data gives you hope. What's the thing that makes you feel excited about the work and the potential pathway ahead for your profession?
Like you said earlier, that the trend line is going up, where people are feeling more satisfied with their job, and they want to stay in the profession more than 3 to 5 years, or sorry, a few years after school. The thing is, it's showing that teachers care about their job. The only thing that we need to change is the perspective of education here in America. And the thing that's giving me hope, honestly, is having these conversations and making sure that we're always talking about this stuff, and making sure that the teacher's voice, and we are really at the front lines of speaking up for students pretty much most of the time. So as long as we keep having these spaces and keep discussing these things, that is what gives me hope, the events like this.
Thanks, Joe. And Congresswoman Hayes, maybe I'll ask you, you introduced a resolution today. It looks like it's already has 25 or so co-sponsors on it. So clearly there's some energy behind it. I'm just curious, like, what you hope the message from that resolution will be, or what the impact that you hope comes from it.
Well, again, I mean, a resolution generally keeps an issue top of mind. And I think now, especially with all of the attacks against public education, you kind of put people on the record of what is it that you support and where do you stand on these issues that are so critical. But again, I decided several years ago that I have no use for platitudes. If you support teachers, I have colleagues who will make floor speeches about raising teacher pay. And I said, well, I have a bill to do that. You should sign on. Let's try to get some traction on it. When we have, conversations about how to improve, wraparound services and support services for students. Okay, well, we are actually the body that has the ability to do that. So unlike the general public who can say, I wish there was a way to get a law passed to do this, we are actually the lawmakers. And I remind my colleagues all the time, I don't want to see a tweet. I don't want to see a graphic. Let's roll up our sleeves and engage in the real work of making sure these things happen. And it doesn't mean we're going to solve every single problem that exists. But once we identify the problem, I don't need people to illuminate it or continue to tell me how we got there. I need you to work with me to get our kids out of that problem. And that is literally, where I am today. I think that for me, because I heard Ms. Pope say, talking about teachers in New York and the environment that she has in New York, I have a very different, a heightened sense of both responsibility and obligation. I'm from the state of Connecticut, who there's a level of investment in public education. We have a Democratic governor, a Democratic legislature, who are working really hard, to improve outcomes for students. But I'm not okay with just knowing that no matter what happens next, the students in Connecticut will have a chance. I want the kids in Low Country, Mississippi to have a chance. I want the kids in South Carolina to have a chance. I want the kids in rural communities to have a chance as well. So my classroom went from the kids in Waterbury Public School to every kid in this nation, every kid on every military base, every kid who I know just deserves a shot at a public education to get there. So I just don't accept that we can't do anything. Like, this is the United States Congress. I've seen what we can do. So this is about the political will, because we absolutely have the capacity. So the resolution is just another marker where I keep introducing bills. You say you want to feed children, I have a bill to do that. Let's do the hard work of feeding children. So I'm not gathering new friends because it takes a lot of hard work to be my friend. but you know, I know what the results of inaction are. You know, we have one shot at these kids. Once they leave our classrooms, once they get out of the school, you may never see them again. So while they're in front of you, we have to do everything that we can, you know, to pave the pathway. So I'm going to keep introducing resolutions and bills and amendments and budget language and on the record in committee, because I'm reminding people we actually have the ability to do something about everything you say you don't like.
Thank you, Congresswoman. And I'll just one last question for the group, and Carrie or Joe or Carla, I'd love for any of you to jump in on this. We are talking a lot about the threats that are coming from the federal government, and also we saw things that teachers do want, that they want to see different, whether that's artificial intelligence or innovative staffing models or high quality instructional materials. And so as you either talk to your colleagues or Carrie, as you talk to families across the country, I'm curious, what are the things that you think we should be investing in, that we should be pushing forward, that teachers are talking about in this data?
We've got to make progress for kids under any and all conditions. Like even under these terrible conditions, we still got to move forward. And there are things that we can and should be moving forward on. We need to be preparing our kids for the jobs and economy of the future. We want not just graduation, we want economic mobility. And so I think there's an opportunity for us to do things like addressing the nation's literacy crisis, giving every child in America a pathway to whatever that path, you know, to the job and economy of the future is going to look like for them. Every kid should be having that. And I'm excited to see that teachers are really excited about AI and technology and innovation. And how do we make classrooms more engaging so kids are excited and we can do things like you know, overcoming the issues we have around chronic absenteeism, because kids want to be in the classroom and they don't want to miss a day. That's the kind of energy that we're looking for. That's the kind of spark we want to see in our kids. So I'm actually excited because, you know, we can't just be wallowing and saying, oh my gosh, we're under attack here. We've got to start moving forward. We can't concede 4 years and say, well, hopefully we'll get a new president and maybe we'll make some progress then. We got to do it now. Our kids can't be waiting on us.
I have to jump in there because I think what is happening right now is this idea that if you convince people before they even start to fight that they've already lost, you erase their will. Like I said, the kids in front of us right now cannot wait 4 years. 4 years is already too late. So it is incumbent upon every one of us to literally fight for them. You know, all of these things to make sure that they are best prepared to enter the workplace, to meet the challenges of the society that they are going to, you know, come of age in. That can't happen without understanding the complexities of our history. That can't happen without, you know, being prepared for the next generation workforce. That can't happen without having AI and computer skills and technology, all of the things that they're going to need as they enter the workplace. We have, you know, we've tried to, my colleagues always say that they support workforce development. We have a WIOA, a workforce authorization bill that is ready to go, that was stripped out of the last budget negotiations that we did. So you can't keep saying that you care about these things. And every time we have the opportunity to act on them, we don't. But I also, and I said this before, but it's worth mentioning again, I take issue with the idea that our kids who are in our Title I or inner city public schools can only get a trade job. You know, those kids should be able to have any opportunity they want. If they want to learn a skill and have career and technical training, they should be able to do that. If they want to go get a professional degree or pursue college education, they should also be able to do that. And if we really cared about those outcomes, we would be removing all of the barriers. A kid doesn't care about conjugating verbs if they don't know where they're sleeping tonight or where their next meal is coming from, or their parent is incarcerated, or their grandmother can't afford her medication, or their friend just died. So unless and until we start to work out all of those barriers, and they're always comparing our education to, you know, Nordic countries or European countries where they have universal health care, universal child care, paid family leave, parents stay at home with their kids for a full year, all of those social networks that support an infrastructure that is conducive to learning. If we really wanted to have some honest conversations about improving outcomes, we would say, okay, here's a list of all the barriers. Let's check them off and eliminate them one by one. And I know my kids that I taught would have risen to the occasion and literally thrived in those kinds of environments. So we cannot concede defeat right now. Whenever I feel like that, I remind myself that so many people did more with less in order to allow me to be in this space. So because of that, it propels me to literally will myself for one more day. And like, it is stabilizing for me to know that 3.5 million public school teachers feel the way that I do. So when I don't have hope anymore, you guys give me hope. So you can't give up. You all I got.
Well, thank you, Congresswoman. Thank you, Carrie. I know I need to wrap us up here because we're coming up on our time, but I just want to say that what you've heard on this call is that educators reject the changes being proposed, but they do not reject change. They are not defending a status quo that is not serving them or their students, and they are ready and willing to stand and work with anybody, legislators, education leaders, President Trump, Secretary McMahon, anybody that wants to work alongside teachers to shape a future that will reimagine education, not dismantle it, that will build pathways to opportunity for all kids in this country, that will honor and celebrate a truly noble profession. Teachers stand ready to work with those people. I'm going to be with some of those teachers tonight and the chancellor in New York City. I'm going to be with some of those teachers tomorrow in Chicago. And we're going to be uplifting teachers' voices from across the country on these issues and in support of the resolution that Congresswoman Hayes introduced because it speaks directly to that. So thank you. Please check out the survey and use the data in your own advocacy. If there are any other questions, please send them in and we'll be happy to follow up and answer them. Thank you so much for your time.